Really grateful to have our guest here today, because I think what's been really great so far about the Work Life Reporter is that we've been on a roll of being able to speak to very significant people leaders across multiple sectors and multiple facets and industries. So today is for me is this really proud moment, because we're continuing in that vein and continuing to have these great conversations. And I think for me, it's really nice to have our guest here today, because she has such an amazing amount of insight, such an amazing amount of expertise and knowledge, and more than anything, just like our guest last week, she is someone with right at the forefront of her sector and her field. So it's great to have Vanessa Okonkwo today on the program. She's head of people at culture at Dock and Bay, and yeah, Vanessa, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reaching out. It's always a pleasure to be invited to things like this. I'm very passionate about what I do. So yeah, happy to be chatting today.
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely felt that passion. Speaking to you when we were scoping out the episodes in terms of
Yeah,
topic, I feel that passion, and in terms of you know your knowledge of the sector, but more importantly, how passionate you feel about the issues that the people leaders face. So it's really great to be talking to you. So basically, our episode today is talking about the culture gap, what it actually takes to measure the distance between culture, what cultural leaders claim, and the one that people live inside. And I think that
yeah,
I think that difference is really important to highlight, and to give people that understanding of what that means, because a lot of people see culture as a nice to have, but more than anything, it's clear that it's a commercial driver.
yeah,
And I think that's one of the things that really fascinated me about your keynote at the HR
yeah,
Technologies
yeah,
conference, because you spoke about how different the culture you think you have from the one that people actually experience. And I think
yes,
that's really fascinating to explore that. So we can dive
yeah,
in here, because I'd love to speak to you about what you feel, in terms of what culture starts at the top. When people say culture starts at the top, what does that mean in practice? Because it'll be great to get some insight from you in terms of what that means from a practical point of view, especially in your sector.
yeah. No, thank you. For me, you're completely right in terms of like my stance. My stance is that culture is a commercial driver, right? So it's as important as any other component in business, whether that's whether you're looking at your P&L, your finances, your how your performance. Culture is should be measured in similar ways, so it's significant. Um, for me, culture in terms of being quite predominant and quite key, it's all about leadership and starting at the top, as I mentioned before. So for me, your leadership represents your culture, what your leadership does, how they live your values, how they present themselves, their stance, their opinions, their point of view, how they challenge, how they speak to people, for example, is the epitome of your culture. So if you think about your organization and then you think about the people at the top, the C-suite, the CEO, the COO, those core leadership people in business, that is the precedence that is set, and that is essentially what your culture will be. So often people see HR as culture drivers and culture, I guess, the people who are responsible for culture. But I would say that we're responsible for driving it, and we're definitely responsible for the accountability piece, but it really starts with the leadership. There's like an old African adage that you may or may not know, but it kind of like describes like the fish rots from the head down. So if the leadership team isn't strong, if it isn't what it needs to be, if it isn't represented in the right way, or what you feel that your culture should represent, it is really hard to have a good and solid culture without that leadership team being top notch and being what is expected of them, essentially.
That's amazing. That's an amazing perspective, because for me, it's really fascinating for you to speak about the fact that, um, you believe culture is not just owned by HR alone.
No.
It's what leadership behavior has to look like,
Yes.
for that to be true, rather than just a slogan. Because you walk into a lot of companies, and I've been around the block from a corporate point of view, and I've worked at major companies and startups, and when you walk into the break room or you walk into somewhere and you see those massive signs everywhere where it's like, we are vision, we are this is
Yeah.
our culture, these are the 5 pillars of our
Yeah.
company culture.
Yeah.
And you realize more than anything that those are slogans. They feel like just things you see on a wall that have to be there. And it doesn't matter the size of the company. I've seen it absolutely everywhere. There's usually a slogan on the wall that's usually either a quote from Steve Jobs or someone important, or from Gandhi, or something that's added to the company's adage. And it literally says, this is what we are. This is who we are. We're forward thinking. We're energetic. We care about people. But 9 times out of 10, you realize that you're absolutely right that culture really stems from the top. It stems from how the MD or CEO or founder or whoever at the top, whoever the people are at the top, how it's, cascades down to the individual people, even in the lowest rungs of the company. So
Yeah. Yeah, I
I'd
agree.
love to talk to you about building a measurement system. Because for me, I believe you've built a measurement system,
Yes.
at your firm, it's honest enough to contradict you,
Yes.
because I would love to know more about the 360 feedback system you built, because I think performance reviews and competency frameworks, are great to have, but
Yes.
I'd love to know about, what actually gets measured and what actually gets lived, in terms of how that's taken forward and how that's maximized upon, in terms of, the feedback system that you've been able to build,
Yeah.
at your
Yeah.
company.
Yeah, no, and I would love to, get into our 360 feedback system. Is actually quite interesting because feedback isn't something that is focused on a lot, especially in our industry, in HR in general, right? We believe in the concept of feedback, but what I've done at Document is a couple of things. Is first of all, I've built a simple framework of what good culture means at Document. So when we think about, there's like 4 different components that I say that at Document we have these components in place to ensure that our culture is adequate, it's fair, it's inclusive, etc., and people can thrive. Then I've got a feedback system, and I will go into radical candor and what that is and how we've applied it at Document as well. And then that is our accountability piece, and that's how we ensure that we have honest and open conversations always. So for me, components first is, I would say for us, culture consists of clarity. So people need to understand what they're trying to achieve, what does good performance look like, and how am I expected to behave whilst performing. And that's where we ensure that the values get lived, right? So we ensure that our core competencies, our behavioral framework gets lived by doing this. And then what does progression look like? Because at Document, 80% of our employees, we've measured it, are looking to either progress, evolve, or grow within their roles, whether as individual contributors, managers, etc. So progression for us is a core focus point. And then understanding that people can't perform against expectations that they don't understand. So we ensure that, these expectations are all laid out across all competency frameworks. And then when it comes to the 360 reviews, they are essentially fed back on how they're performing against sort of the expectations that we've put in place. So then psychological safety is key. I know that it's a current buzzword at the moment, but we literally measure it. So I measure psychological safety within our DEI and engagement surveys yearly. I'm very proud of the progression of our psychological safety results. Is actually up 10% year on year. We're currently at about 84% psychologically, so 84% of our team feels psychologically safe. And for me, psychological safety doesn't mean comfortability or, being able to be comfortable and, for me, psychological safety means being able to be comfortable when things get uncomfortable, because you're able to have honest and open, challenging conversations that might not feel great in that moment, but it's safe enough to have it. It's safe enough to voice your opinion. It's safe enough to be heard. And for me, that's a key thing. And then accountability. So accountability can't be avoided at Dock and Bay. Everybody's accountable for something, accountable for performance, for a bottom line, for work, etc. We're all accountable, right? And we've put kind of like a more of a flattish structure in place in terms of hierarchy, where it's open, and we're not really like a hierarchical business. Of course, we are a business that operates that way, but we are open in the aspect of accountability, and we are open when it comes to everyone's accountability. It isn't hidden. It isn't like behind closed doors. It's pretty open and honest in that sense. And then belonging and inclusion. DEI has always been a bone of contention. I know that especially with our political climate, and we have a team in the US, and we all know what's happening there. Like DEI is secondary at the moment for a lot of bigger corporations, a lot of companies now across the world. But for us, we've made it the center of everything that we do. So we measure everything. We measure the demographics of our team. We understand who we're speaking to. We understand our audiences. We understand how we operate in terms of a business. We understand what our comms should be like in certain regions, etc. We prioritize hearing people out. We prioritize people's backgrounds. We prioritize those components that matter to us. And then we prioritize what the results are telling us in terms of the data that we're gathering and what our gaps are, and we're honest about it. So, and then, we have confidential kind of like whistleblowing mechanisms. So we have a tool that, that anyone can give feedback to the business, and we will go back on that tool and kind of like ensure that feedback is heard and addressed accordingly too. So we ensure that we've got confidential mechanisms in place to support our DE&I and our psychological safety too. So for me, with all those components in place, I believe that once lived and once kind of attained and taken seriously and lived by, a healthy culture can take place. Then moving on to the 360 feedback piece, it's really about being able to give feedback at all levels, sideways, upwards, and downwards, and ensuring that we have a cycle in place to ensure that people understand that this is something that will be assessed like everything else in this business, whether it's performance, whether it's, any kind of like performance mechanism. 360 feedback is taken as seriously. It impacts bonus, it impacts the compensation package, it impacts all of those things because we take it so seriously. For me, feedback fuels growth, and without feedback, how do we grow as a business? How do we grow as individuals? How do we become better people? So radical candor is something that I live by. It's something I'm actually ingraining into the team. We're now on our 6th workshop, embedding the Radical Candor Framework, which is by Kim Scott. So I don't know if you've actually heard the book. I don't know if you've read the book or heard about the book, Josh, but it's such an amazing, amazing book that I've taken and I've adopted at Dock and Bay. But it's the process of feeding back. So it's a process of caring deeply and challenging directly, essentially. So you can care deeply for someone and feedback with respect and challenge them directly, essentially. So these two pinnacles, these two kind of like pillars are how we embed and how we give feedback in our business. Then we have a yearly cycle of 360 feedback in terms of actual written documentation and actual written kind of feedback that is stored. But then we also ensure that radical candor isn't just a moment, it's an ongoing conversation at every single turn. So whether this is a one-to-one, a meeting, we encourage challenge, we encourage feedback, we encourage, kind of like going against the grain almost, and being able to kind of like voice how you're feeling, or even just voice your opinion on something. We don't believe that any kind of opinion is small. We don't believe that your manager's opinion is kind of more significant or more important. We believe that everybody has a voice and everybody has the right to challenge and to feedback on either a process, an individual, etc. So for us, that 360 feedback element is like kind of like 365 days, always on, never off. But yeah, and that's how we measure it, and then we use that data, and we use that feedback to ensure that it's it's impacting your performance whether good or bad, essentially.
That is absolutely amazing. I think for me, what you've been able to cover here is such a length and breadth of how you've provided this whole 360 environment for your colleagues, and I think that's something that a lot of people leaders are aspiring to right now. But it's just absolutely
Yeah.
amazing to see that you've been able to achieve that from not just your perspective of safety perspective, but from a practical standpoint as well. Because I think that's really crucial for people leaders to get that understanding of how they can actually create an environment that actually encourages um, the ability to speak up, but more than anything, the ability to feel like it is almost a flat hierarchy. Now, that word really fascinates me because there are a lot of companies that promise that promise a flat hierarchy, that promise the fact that everyone has a voice. And at times you find yourself, you know, being told that that's the culture, but because people are ultimately creatures of habit, and we want to experience culture in a certain way, and um, we want to go into a workplace feeling like we're our best selves. And at times, when you feel like that environment is saying one thing and your experience is another, it ultimately leaves you disillusioned, and it leaves you in a place where feedback is not something you're actually interested in giving at all. And
Yeah.
it's absolutely amazing to see that you've been able to work into the new that. And you spoke about things like the geopolitical situation, in the Americas, and how that's, how you're still standing by that from a DEI perspective and making sure that there's representation, there's inclusion. And some might see that, people leaders find themselves having to strike that balance of how do you create this open and engaging environment while still keeping in you might be in. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being able to give that amount of insight, because I think that's really, really crucial.
Yeah.
And I think people
Yeah. And
need to people hear that from someone of your standing, that this is something that people leaders like yourself are um, still value and still see as something that should be validated from an employee's point of view.
yes. Yeah, and I think the how is so important because there is a word called integrity, and for me, integrity is so important. And all integrity is doing is saying exactly what you said you'll do, doing exactly what you said that you'll do, and integrity is like key here, right? So for me, it's all about leading by example. So Andy, who is my CEO, who I have an amazing relationship with, and I think that relationship between HR and CEO has to be so solid and so key that like CEO has to trust you, and vice versa, right? So I can't say that we have a flat hierarchical, like flat cult, like flat hierarchy without Andy being accessible, without Andy being able to be fed back on, without Andy showcasing that he's able to take on feedback the same way that we require our the rest of the team, right? So they have to see that in practice, and I think that's the how. Like the how is the practice, is what are you truly doing and what are you truly saying, and then is it matching, essentially. Sorry, Josh, are you there? Sorry, I think, have I lost Josh?
Um, Sorry, Vanessa, I think I may have lost you there.
Oh, okay,
Not
okay.
sure if you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
lost you, I think, halfway through. Yeah,
can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear
I'm
me?
going to. Sorry, one second. I'm just having a little bit of technical trouble here.
Okay,
Apologies.
no worries.
I'll exit the studio and re-enter. Just a moment.
Okay, cool. Okay, no worries.
Hi, Vanessa. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. Apologies. I've just run into some really poor Wi-Fi issues, so I
Okay.
really
No
apologize
worries.
for my. So I basically had to switch device last minute.
Okay.
So
Okay, fine.
my
No worries.
apologies for that. But you can see and hear me clearly.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah. So please do carry on. Apologies.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Uh,
I was just saying that, the how is super important, because I know that you said that, a lot of HR leaders want to be able to
yes.
put a lot of this into practice. And I said, the how has to is so important here. So for me, the way I see it is that, for example, Andy, my CEO,
Yeah.
he has to be public, like take on feedback, right? He has to live that example. And we have an amazing work relationship, and I think HR and that C-suite relationship is so key, and there has to be trust there for integrity to take place. And if Andy, for example, isn't living and taking on that feedback and being able to be fed back on, and feedback isn't able to go up, it surely will not be received when coming down well. But also, this then culture of kind of like open feedback and radical candor can't take place, right?
Yeah.
So it's, Andy has to set that example. It has to be put into practice for it then to be lived. And that's, for me, super key, right? And that's why I said that cultural piece, that culture comes from from top down, is so important, because without the team being able to see our CEO, being open about where he's messed up or the mistakes that we've made, or taking on the feedback from the team, it just won't work that way, essentially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's really crucial. I think for me, it's great to see that level of visibility and that level of responsibility that you place on your leaders, and that you actively work with your senior leadership team, especially even up from your CEO all the way down, to be able to take that level of perspective, take that level of knowledge, and make sure that it always cascades down, and your belief in that, in the company's culture and standing and overall day-to-day dynamic is really crucial. I think what I'd love to wrap up on is that 89% engagement score, because I think that's a really great number to explore, because there are a lot of companies that I've worked at, a lot of companies, large and small, and it's really fascinating, and it's really interesting, because when you see a lot of companies talk about their engagement scores, most of the time they're not very interested in sharing that, because 9 times out of 10, it's not great reading, and it doesn't matter the size of the company. There's so many nuances within an organization that they genuinely feel like they're not so they're not as proud as of their engagement scores as they can be, because ultimately they're on the low side, and people feel like engagement is this zero-sum situation where it's always going to be low, because people are always people come into work in different moods and different with different issues that they come into it with their from their personal lives. But the fact that you're able to share those numbers, I'd love to know about the practicalities and the logistics of how you were able to ascertain that number, and more than anything, how you feel like how those engagement numbers can be maintained, and how you are putting initiatives in place to actively bolster them on a daily basis within your firm.
Yeah, so I think, it's not as hard as people think. I think that, number one, let's analyze the purpose of an engagement survey, and if are we really doing our jobs as HR leaders in terms of like looking at the feedback. I scrutinize my data. I completely rip it apart. I actually have quite a pessimistic mindset when reading some of the stuff, because I want to ensure that because inherently we're all biased, right? And confirmation bias is a real thing. And I think as HR leaders, we can fall into this trap, especially because we're the culture keeper. So we want the best for, we always want the best and we always want the best results. But what I do is that I scrutinize the data. I take every single line of feedback, look at every single thing. No stone goes unturned with Vanessa, right? So first of all, I look at all the data and I look at what we can do. I look at what we can't feasibly do, and I'm honest about it. I'm so honest with the team about what it is that I've seen, and I've seen, and that's why our engagement results have gone up year on year, because as of 3-4 years ago, we were sitting in the 70s at that point. And it's gone up year on year, has stagnated as of last year because we've had some turnover as well. But the reason why we've had growth in our engagement results is because the integrity piece. We have told the team that we've got the feedback, we've fed back to the team, and I do 2 or 3 things here that are very, very specific. I do a company-wide pack that I'm feeding back to the whole business globally, and then I do smaller packs per department, per team, where we really drill into some of those problem areas. Because remember, whilst we have common themes across the board, individually, departments are struggling with different aspects of engagement. Some might be as simple as comps and bends, some might be feedback in terms of engagement, some might be belonging, some might be culture-wise. It just depends on, what team is struggling where and how. And then we create targeted intervention methods per problem. And for the problems that we can't fix, we are honest and we say, guys, this isn't in scope this year for these reasons, and here's why. And I think the why is so important. And there's so much. I think people underestimate how powerful humility is and how powerful honesty is in these moments. Because what you'll be surprised is that people appreciate more that you're honest with them than just brushing it under the carpet and not addressing it at all. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is the avoidance, right? Is the avoidance of the truth, is that avoidance of, okay, but pretty much we know that probably 60% of us aren't happy with our salaries right now, or aren't happy with our benefits package right now. So avoiding that truth is where I think a lot of companies go wrong. And whereas, okay, no, let's not touch it because we don't have, because we're not going to be honest about what we can do. So I'm honest with the team. I'm honest with the leadership team. I'm honest with all of them and say, listen, this is something that we can, and this is something that we can do, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is when we're going to do it by. And I'm actually going to live by those deadlines. And if I can't live by a deadline that I've set myself, I'm honest about why I couldn't. And then for the stuff that I can't do, I'm honest. I was like, guys, we can't do this right now, and here's why.
No, that's absolutely amazing, because that's at times, you get a lot of perspectives from human resources or people teams nowadays, and at times I think a lot of employees feel like HR or people leadership it's just an extension of leadership. You feel like they have to toe the company line, and 9 times out of 10 it's about protecting the business. And of course it is. People leaders are by extension employees themselves. They're in leadership, or they're, so they have to think about the bottom line of the company. But more than anything, why I really find your perspective very engaging is because you also talk about the fact that you're still dealing with individuals more than anything. People with different cultures and different backgrounds and different perspectives always coming into the business. People may have certain misgivings and certain certain feelings about how they're treated in the workplace and how their role might be seen in the grand scheme of things, in terms of salary, in terms of packages, in terms of how they feel, how valued they feel within an organization. More than anything, you're saying that, look, this is still about people. This is still about individuals. And I really appreciate that, because that is ultimately what people want to see from people leadership. They want to see the fact that you guys, you care, and more than anything, you understand the realities of what it takes to be in that position on a day-to-day basis. You can give people the truth in terms of, look, this can probably happen. We can work with leadership to make this happen, and this is probably somewhere we can't go. Your approach, in my opinion, is the kind of approach I think a lot of people leaders are aspire to, and I think it's what really it gives me context as to why those engagement scores are really good, and why I'm very confident they will continue to improve, because it feels like you've built a really engaging atmosphere within Dark and Bay, and you've really been able to you're more than anything constantly looking for ways to improve that, because I think for people leadership, it's all about constant improvement, all about looking for ways to engage with that. So I'd love to wrap up. I know I said that was my last question, but this I'd love to wrap up talking about the future, because once again, you're a people leader at a fast moving and rapidly growing organization that's growing internationally and expanding. I'd love to talk about where you see people leadership going, because again, we are living in a world that's constantly changing thanks to technology, and particularly artificial intelligence. We're living in a world that's constantly changing, constantly moving and evolving so rapidly. There are things that you see that are gospel one day, and within weeks or months they've pretty much become obsolete. So I'd love to know, from your perspective as a people leader at the forefront, where you see people leadership going and how you see technology playing a part in that, particularly AI. And it's something that I'm looking to ask all of our guests, because I know that a lot of people think, oh, people leadership, it's all about people. Their human element is always going to be important. And of course it is. And I think, Catherine, my previous guest, spoke about that. She was like, look, this is about human capital. But I'd love to know, from your perspective, where you see the future going. And do you see this as being more of a hybrid? Do you see this as something where AI completely takes over? Or do you see this as something that, where there's going to be something that's going to be a jarring change in the future?
Yeah, so I think AI is here to stay, right? I am very pro AI myself. And do I believe that AI will take away some jobs? 100%. We're seeing it already, and we're seeing it with, especially, I'm sure that, everyone sees the news, especially in the UK right now, the graduates coming out of university, they're struggling, right? Because AI is taking away a lot of those mundane entry-level tasks. But what I do see is evolution of roles. And even as my role has evolved, as we grow as a business, I see individual roles across all departments and sectors growing and evolving. And I think AI is a central part of that evolution. But what I do think in terms of the people element is that the people element stays. I think that AI is a capability tool, and it's allowing for more human to human connection versus being swamped and doing a lot of these mundane entry level kind of like mundane admin tasks. AI for me has transformed my time essentially. So that efficiency has been key. And I'm seeing it even in, like, for example, I wouldn't hire a full-time FT into my team right now because AI has taken away a lot of those mundane tasks that do take me a long time. But then what it creates time for is the strategic part, and then allowing HR to continue to shift from back office function to strategic and work with the senior leadership team, be embedded as part of that business strategy and be more of a central component versus an afterthought. So for me, AI has been amazing for HR, right? That's my stance. That's what I believe. I think it's been amazing for my function as a whole, and I think it will only grow and improve. I'm not afraid of it. I actually embrace it. We have at Dock and Bait a whole AI strategy. We've actually just hired our first AI lead. So in terms of our talent acquisition strategy, it's definitely pro technology. And then we continue to embed and to evolve as time goes on.
No, thank you so much for that perspective, Vanessa, because I think a lot of people leaders have differing perspectives about AI. Some people are very much pro, some people are very much against it, some people sit in the middle and waiting on the sidelines to see how it's going to change and how it's going to affect their sector. So to hear you speak about it, about having this forward first approach about AI is really refreshing to hear, because people
I worry about waiting on the sidelines. So I worry about that approach, because I think even with like the digital age and when the internet broke, right, and then Google came out, I'm sure people were worried about them. And the thing is, like, if you don't get ahead or you don't get with it, you're left behind, you know. And then being the last hurdle of people getting to grips with something as massive as this is not going to be great for anyone's growth, even just like as a function, and then puts you behind. And I feel like HR has always historically been left behind constantly. So for me, this is our opportunity to get on that bandwagon and support it, and embed it as part of your L&D strategy. It's definitely part of mine. It's definitely part of mine, and then get ahead with the times. And I think that it's important as HR leaders that we take that approach versus wait and let's see how it works out, because we're always left behind. We're always the afterthought. And we're always, we've been historically seen as this back officey function that will get caught up eventually. And I think this is the time to just get ahead of it, because it's here to stay. I don't see it going anywhere.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, AI is, it's not a case of, you have to give up every one of your standards and just drop it all for AI. You can find a way to balance the things that are part and parcel of your role, but more than anything, the learnings and the experience that you have, and bring it into AI. AI is a force multiplier. It's not, I don't see it as a replacement for any of the, especially people-based functions. I don't think you can ever replace, people, and functionality in its entirety, because it's all about utilizing the tools that help amplify the role and help make sure that you're engaging with the nuance of that, and that's the most important thing. And so it's really great to hear you speak about that. And of course, opinions vary on AI in terms of how it's going to change things. And the landscape, the way it's absolutely changed the landscape is really fascinating. And this is ironic coming from a person who is running an AI startup, but it's really fascinating to see that change, and how it's absolutely making recruitment different, how it's absolutely making people leadership, everything about that. And a lot of people are talking about it right now in terms of it's also interesting to hear that you guys have brought on an AI lead, because again, companies are starting to think about that from a practical point of view. It's also interesting to hear that it's changing your recruitment perspectives and policies, and how you guys are bringing people on. And I think a lot of companies are going to start thinking that way as well, because it's super crucial, and it's super pivotal. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'll try not to take up any more of your time. I know we've already gone over with our technical glitch. So thank you so much for bearing with us and sticking with us through it. And as for the audience, I really hope that you guys have been able to get some amazing insight from Vanessa. And please do please go check her out on LinkedIn. I think what she's doing at Dark Bay is absolutely amazing, and I think from my perspective, it's only gonna get better. And she is just an amazing well of insight and knowledge and experience, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the program, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us. I know once again, with everything in the Work Life Reporter, it was all out of the blue. So for you to join us, it's an absolute honor. Super grateful, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. No, thank you for having me. This is fun. It's always fun doing it. So thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you everyone. And this has been the Work Life Reporter, and we will see you again on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you.